Well, welcome. This is VBS Torah Study for Shabbos morning, and I'm Rabbi Ed Feinstein of Valley Beshalom. And I'm usually accompanied by my dear friends, Rabbi Hirsch, Rabbi Gelman, Rabbi Borowitz. But this week, everyone was resting from the previous holidays, so you're stuck just with me today. But I'm delighted that you came on to join for this episode of Torah Study. You know, if you told your boss or your non-Jewish neighbors that you have another holiday coming up for a couple more days, they'd probably think you'd lost your mind. And they wouldn't be entirely wrong, because after the intensity of Rosh Hashanah and the super intensity of Yom Kippur, here we have another holiday just 4 days later. And it's not just a holiday, it's a very big holiday. It's a long holiday, it's 9 days long, 2 days of Sukkot, then some days of Chol HaMoed, the middle days, then Shmini Atzeret, and then Simchat Torah, a whole nother panoply of holidays coming right on the heels of the high holidays. Seems a little much. Seems like kind of a mistake in the way that someone put together a Jewish calendar. So let's first understand why this holiday is here. I mean, the simple reason is that this holiday is an agricultural festival that fits precisely at this time of year. And it goes along with the Passover holiday in the springtime, which fits that season of the year as an agricultural festival. But in fact, it's even deeper than that, because this is a holiday which is the coda, the ending of this long holiday season. So let's go back for a minute. The holiday season of the fall begins a month before Rosh Hashanah with the month of Elul. And the tradition, of course, is that during the month of Elul, we are instructed to make amends with all of the neighbors that we might have offended and all of the friends that we might have hurt and all the loved ones that we didn't pay the attention to that they were due. It's part of a month of introspection and reflection and self-evaluation. The Hebrew phrase is cheshbon hanefesh, which means an accounting of the soul. During this month, we take time each of the days of the month. In some traditions, for example, it was a tradition to get up and late at night and to go out and sort of talk your confession out into the world. In others, it was to pray special prayers every day. During this month of Elul, we begin this arduous process of examining each part of the soul, the way we spent our time, how we spent our money, how the quality of our relationships, and evaluate the self. And that climaxes in Rosh Hashanah, when the great book of our lives is open in front of the judge, and we stand there, if not accused, at least evaluated and audited. And the judge decides, does this soul deserve another year of life based on what they have done with the life I gave them before? And then we have these 10 days, which is the most intensive time of introspection and self evaluation, really taking the self apart, cleansing each part, asking God for forgiveness for the mistakes that we've made, in resolving to establish new patterns of behavior, new ways of looking at the world, so that we don't fall into the same destructive and hurtful patterns that we found ourselves before. And all of that climaxes with the intensity of Yom Kippur. As we've said before, Yom Kippur is actually a rehearsal for death. And the reason for this is because confronting our mortality, confronting our finitude, confronting the certainty that we run away from all the year long, that not one of us has an infinite number of tomorrows, and that death will come for all of us one day. That's the most powerful solvent that the tradition could use to wipe away the rationalizations, the excuses, the dodges, the defense mechanisms that we employ to keep ourselves from seeing the truth about ourselves. So for one day we rehearse death. We fast for the day, which of course for Jews is like dying, you know. We wear a kittel. The kittel is a death shroud. It's the outfit we're going to bury you in one day. You keep it at the back of your closet, and this one day a year, you take it out, dust it off, put it on, come to shul for 25 hours and wear it. You're not supposed to wear fancy clothes, fancy jewelry. You're not supposed to wear fancy shoes, just like a person preparing for burial. And we recite the Vidui, which is the prayer one says on the deathbed. All of it is a reminder that death comes for all of us. And the reason for that, that morbid thought, is that we take seriously the time that we do have. We take seriously this opportunity to reach out to others, to loved ones, and say thank you, to reach out to mentors and those who have guided us and helped us and say, you've been so important to me, a blessing to me, to reach out to those we love and remind them how much we love them. It's a solvent for washing away all of the distractions that keep us from living the lives that we're supposed to be living all the time. And it's an intense thing. It was certainly intense for me. I spent most of the day in the synagogue. I lead services, you sit through services, but still, it's a lot of work if you really do the work, looking inward, looking into the soul. And we're exhausted by the end. Go to break fast and we celebrate life again. We're sort of resurrected with that last shofar blast at the end of the holiday, and we say Lashana Haba Yerushalayim. And then what happens next? What happens to us if we really do the work of confronting our death, confronting our finitude, confronting our mortality, confronting our sinfulness, confronting in a very humble way what we have done with life and how far we are from the people we're meant to be and how far we are from the ideals we once held and how far we are from bringing our world together toward those ideals. If we really do that work, by the time we get to the end of the holiday, we're pooped. We're actually exhausted. And the tradition doesn't want us to go right home again. I always tell this to people who have major life cycle events. I say this to couples getting married. Sometimes couples have been together for a long time and they're finally getting married and they're tempted. They say, we're going to go on a honeymoon this summer. So we're just going to go home after the wedding. And I say, no, 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 no. Don't go home. You'll miss something because something happens to you under the chuppah. Something happens to you at a wedding ceremony. You're on a high. Your heart is light. Your soul is dancing. Don't just go home. Go check yourself into a nice hotel someplace, a beautiful place. Take a couple days, a mini moon, if you will. Take a couple days and just absorb, internalize the idea that the ring on my finger now makes me a different person. I have said the most powerful words a human being can say. I turn to my partner, the one I love, and say, I'm here for you forever. I need you. And I know that you need me, and I trust you. And I take upon myself responsibility for all that you need in life, and I know that you will too. We've said those words, we've danced, we've sung, we've said the prayers. Go to a nice place and let it sink in. Don't just go home. If you just go home to your dirty dishes and feeding the dog and your unmade bed, you're going to feel a terrible letdown. Same thing happens, of course, at sad moments. When the mourner comes home from the funeral, we're not allowed to come right back to life again. We have a week of Shiva. And Shiva is a remarkable custom because just when we really feel like talking to nobody, just when I sit in the dark by myself and wallow in my sorrow, the whole community comes to lift me up and hold me in my grief and lift my grief. And we pray together and we eat together and we share memories together in the very same way that a mini moon or a honeymoon follows a wedding and a Shiva follows a funeral. We can't just go home right after Yom Kippur. We're still too broken inside, too shaken. We need a halfway point. And that's exactly what a sukkah is. It's excuse the expression, a halfway house. It's not home, but it's not quite out in the world. And what's beautiful is that this holiday is called in the tradition Zman Simchatenu, time of our joy, because it's the harvest holiday. We bring in all the things that we've grown over the course of the summer months, and we sit among all the bounty of our fields and our orchards and our vineyards. We sit with our families, our friends, our chavurah, our community. We sit with our community and we look at all the blessings that are ours. It is a holiday devoted to gratitude for all the blessings that are ours. And that's the only healing salve to the devastation that we caused ourselves during these 40 days from the beginning of Elul to Rosh Hashanah through Yom Kippur. The salve, the comfort, the soothing relief comes from sitting there and saying, and yet look at all the blessings that are mine. And that's what makes this man simchatenu. So everything you're not allowed to do on Yom Kippur, we do as a mitzvah on Sukkot. On Yom Kippur, you can't eat. On Sukkot, you feast. It's a mitzvah. On Yom Kippur, we're not to engage in intimacy. On Sukkot, intimacy of a friendship kind, intimacy of a partnered kind, real kind, intimacy is indicated, as it were, because it's part of the blessings of being a body, of being a human being in the world. On Yom Kippur, we spent all the time in the synagogue, inside. On Sukkot, we go outside. We sit in a booth, a sukkah with grass at the top or leaves. We smell nature. We feel the wind on our faces and the sunshine on our backs, and we feel the cool of the night. On Yom Kippur, we are separated from our bodies. On Sukkot, we return to our bodies. We celebrate our bodies. On Yom Kippur, religion is so heavy. On Sukkot, it is so joyful. It is so light. And the ultimate expression of this is that the great tradition was that as we go through the 8 days of Sukkot, there are the 7 days of Sukkot, the 8th day, which is next weekend, is Shmini Atzeret, actually a separate holiday. It was the holiday of rain. It's hard to know that we actually had Jewish rain dances, but yes, that's what we had. And the following day is Simchat Torah, the joy of the Torah. And that's not in the Bible. It's something we created. The rabbis created this in exile in the 1st and 2nd century. We read the Torah on a yearly cycle, 52 weeks of the year. There's 54 portions. Sometimes we double them up. But the beginning and end come on Simchat Torah. We read the last verses of the Torah about Moses' last days in the world, his final words, his final blessings for his people. And then he goes up to the top of the mountain, Mount Nebo, and there, with a kiss from God, Moses sits down and dies. God buries him, and God hides his burial place so that we don't go worship there. Moses dies, and the people of Israel grieve for him. And then, without a beat, without even a pause, we roll the Torah back to the beginning and start again. Breshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. We celebrate Torah. And if you've ever been in a traditional synagogue on Simchat Torah, it's wonderful. You pick up the Torah and we dance. Torah is God's gift to us. Torah is the gift of our ancestors. Torah is the love letter from heaven to earth. Torah is the place where heaven and earth kiss. And so we pick up the Torah and we dance. And what a beautiful symbol. On Yom Kippur, religion is so heavy. It is so burdensome. And on Simchas Torah, it's light as a feather. We dance with the Torah. We pick up the Torah in our arms like a baby, and we dance and we dance and we dance. It's the most joyful day. And that fulfills the whole cycle of these holidays. And that's why Sukkot and Simchat Torah come right after Yom Kippur, because this is our reintroduction to the life of the world, having gone through an intense inspection and rebuilding of the life of the soul. That's why we have to have Sukkot and Simchat Torah right away after the holiday. Now, not just that, but the next thing is the Sukkah itself. So the tradition is we build a Sukkah. And that's kind of hard to imagine because Jews with tools, you don't think of them that so much. Most Jewish men think Black & Decker is a law firm in Beverly Hills. But you build a sukkah and you go outside and you live in it, or at least you eat in it. And a sukkah is any structure that's not permanent, It has to have at least 2.5 walls, and the top is covered with, well, look around me. It's called schach. It's natural stuff, leaves and branches, or any kind of natural stuff. Can't be masonry, for example. Can't be something that's permanent. It has to be this kind of, and it has to have enough light coming through so that you see spots of light on the ground, but not enough to outnumber the spots of darkness, the spots of shade. And the idea is that sitting in a sukkah exposes us to the world outside. Sukkot remembers two things: the harvest festival when our ancestors went out and harvested their crops, and our wandering in the desert, our wandering, our rather our journey through the desert when we were protected by God's benevolence. Because we know we always are protected by God's benevolence, and we give gratitude for that benevolence, for the gifts of food and water and drink and love and kindness and community, all the gifts that come our way. And the last thing about a sukkah is that a sukkah has to be a little shaky. It's not supposed to be too firm. And I think that's a beautiful symbol because the tradition understood that the sukkah building itself represents human life. And while human life is shady, it's protective, while human life is prosperous, while human life is a locus, a place for celebration and joy and bounty, it's also a little fragile. And the bitter sweetness, that combination of the bitter and the sweet, the dependency on God's benevolence, the fragility of our condition, the dependency on nature's bounty, and at the same time, our gratitude for all the gifts that are ours, the bitter sweetness of the human condition is represented in a Zman Simchatenu, a happy time spent in a building that's a little shaky, that's not too terribly firm. The last part about Sukkot that I'd like to take a moment and dwell on with you is a book that we read. You know, every Jewish holiday has a book. There are 5 Megillot at the end of the Hebrew Bible. The Megillot means scrolls, and they were once kept as scrolls, read as scrolls. Some congregations still do that. And the most common one, of course, you all know is Esther. The book of Esther is read on Purim because it's the story of Esther. And the book of Lamentation of Echa, which is a sad book about the destruction of Jerusalem in the 6th century BCE, that's read on Tisha B'Av in the summertime. And the book of Ruth, that beautiful book about a young woman who protects her mother-in-law and comes to be one of us. It's read on Shavuot, first because it happens at the harvest time, as Shavuot is, and second, because it's about a woman accepting Torah, which is what Shavuot is all about. The book of Shir HaShirim, which is a very erotic love poem in the Bible, if I'd known that was there, I would have stayed in Hebrew school, is read on Pesach, because after all, after a couple nights of matzah and maror, who isn't in the mood for romance? No, really. The real reason is because the tradition always saw Shir HaShirim as an allegory to the relationship between God and the people Israel. It's a love relationship. The Torah is our ketubah, and the passion of Israel for God and God for Israel is reflected in the passion of the young lovers described by Shir HaShirim, and that is celebrated on Passover when God rescues us from slavery and begins, as it were, marries us, initiates this relationship of covenant that is so very dear to our identity. And then we get this time, this holiday, Sukkot, we read the fascinating book of Kohelet, Ecclesiastes. I really recommend you take a few minutes, if you can. It's 9 chapters, not very long, and read through the book of Kohelet. Remarkable book. It begins, I think, as most of you know, with a sort of melancholy vision of the world. Kohelet starts by saying, Hevel Hevalim. It's all futility. Everything is futility. What gain is there for a human being living in the world and striving? And then he goes on to describe the idea that everything we human beings aspire to is destined to be wiped away by time. And of course, by death. The image he gives us, of course, is Well, just try this image. This is my image, but the idea is imagine going down to the beach or the shore and you sit there for a couple days, and on the first day you watch and a group of kids comes along, children come along, and they start building sand castles. It's more than castles now. It's turrets and cities and roadways and all kinds of beautiful things. And then the kids are so proud of what they created. But 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the tide comes in and whoosh, it all gets wiped away. And the next day you go out and a different group of kids comes along and they build a whole city out of the sand and the tide comes in and whoosh. And the third day, the same thing. And pretty soon you get the idea. That's what Kohelet tells us. There's nothing new under the sun. Everything that's been interesting has been tried before, and time and death wiped it away. And so he wonders, ma yitaron. The Hebrew word yitaron literally means a counting word. It's a word from accounting. It means profit. When you take away the asset, you subtract from the asset the liability, is anything left? When you take the human project, anything that we hold dear, and you subtract death, is anything left? Is anything left? And Kohelet says, I want to find out. I'm going to go and look to see if there's, well, anything that survives death. And he carries out 4 experiments, and it's fascinating. The first one, he says, what's the one thing most people spend most time seeking the most? And the answer is pleasure, what we would say in American, fun. He says, and fun is fun. Fun is, it's a good thing. I'll tell you what, let's take a look at his words and see what he says. I hope you can see this. He says, I said to myself, come, I'll treat you to merriment and taste mirth. But that too I found was futile. Of merriment, of revelry, I said, it's mad. Of merriment, I said, what good is that? And then he tells you the following story. Because you see, Kohelet, probably written in the 3rd century BCE, pretends to be Solomon. Why Solomon? Because Solomon was both the richest of all men and the wisest of all men. If you didn't have one of those two, you couldn't do these experiments. Because if you weren't the wisest, you'd say, well, a wiser man would have found an answer to the question. And if he wasn't the richest, if you said, well, if he had the money of Bill Gates, or Elon Musk, then he'd really know what life was about. But here's a man who had more money than Elon Musk and more wisdom than Albert Einstein. And he says, what did I discover? Listen carefully. He said, I ventured to tempt my flesh with wine and grasp folly while letting my mind direct with wisdom to the end that I might learn which of the two was better. And he said, I did it all. I multiplied my possessions. I built houses and vineyards and gardens and pools. I amassed silver and gold and all both common and rare pleasures. And here's what he says. I withheld from my eyes nothing they asked for and denied myself no enjoyment. Rather, I got enjoyment out of all my wealth, but that's all I got from my wealth. What is he saying? He's saying something remarkable. What he's saying is, it's the American consumer dream, right? I withheld from my eyes nothing they asked for. And I enjoyed it. I really did. He said, there's nothing wrong with fun. There's nothing wrong with pleasure. He's not condemning. He's not an ascetic. He's not condemning pleasure. But he's saying to you, pleasure is not a reason to be alive. This seeking of pleasure, the hedonistic project, is not a reason to live, because for a very simple reason, it doesn't last. Pleasure is a momentary thing. For that moment, I'm enjoying myself, but a moment later, it's gone. The second reason is because there's something called the cycle of addiction. You all know this, right? Whatever thrill I'm enjoying now, when I want to do it again, I need a bigger hit of the drug in order to gain the same amount of thrill. You ever go to a restaurant? Brand new restaurant in the neighborhood. You're the first one there in the circle of your friends. And the first night, it's glorious. The food is great. The service is exquisite. The atmosphere is wonderful. So you gather a group of friends, you go back. The second time, it's never as good. I don't know. The bread's not as fresh. The waiter's not as kind. The food's not as tasty. Why? Because it doesn't have the surprise it did the first time. And so It's nothing wrong, he says, with enjoying pleasure, but that's not a reason to be alive. That's not going to help you. So, what's the second one? Well, the second thing that most people spend most of their life seeking is, after all, wealth. Let's take a look. He said, my thoughts turned to the fortune my hands had made, to the wealth I'd acquired, and that was also futile. For what will be the man like who succeeds the one who's ruling a long time ago? And then he says, a lover of money never has his fill of money. A lover of wealth never fill his fill of income, right? And more than that, he says, the real problem is that once you have money, now you're worried about someone taking it away from you. And he says, money, well, that's not going to do it either. Money's not a reason to be alive. And he says, and this again is so important, there's nothing wrong with being rich. In fact, there's a distinct advantage to having. Having protects you from not having, and not having is no fun at all. It protects you from poverty, but there's no intrinsic value to it. It's instrumental. It does something else. But if you're looking for a reason to be alive, it's not going to help you. It's not going to help you. And so he says, and there's reasons why money is actually difficult, because if you have it, then you worry about losing it. And he says, it's amazing how rich people worry so much about losing their money, how much of their lives are invested in holding on and not really enjoying the wealth that they were given. He says, and the biggest problem, of course, is that one day you're going to leave, you're going to die, and who are you going to leave the money to? How many times have we heard that story? You know, I remember when I was a kid, when I was on my way to Israel to study for a year, I stopped at the shop where my father worked, and I went to give him a kiss goodbye on my way to the airport. And as I'm walking out, I hear the guys he's working with, and they say, Bert, how come your kid gets to travel the world and you're stuck here working with us? And my dad said, because he has rich parents and I don't. I mean, the guy who amasses the fortune on the basis of his hard work, his ingenuity, his dedication, has to pass it on to someone who by definition didn't have that hard work, ingenuity, and dedication. And that's how so many second generation family businesses fail. That's the problem with wealth. But you could say, well, listen, Rabbi, you know, fun is fun and wealth is wealth, but that's material. What about the higher goals in life? And here Kohelet anticipates us. And here's what he says. Let's take a look at wisdom. I mean, after all, who's more invested in education than the Jewish people? But he says, wait a minute, wisdom? I found that wisdom is superior to folly as light is superior to darkness. A wise man has eyes in his head, whereas a fool walks in darkness. But the same fate awaits them both. And then elsewhere he says, the problem is that with the more wisdom you have, what he calls vexation, the more problems you have. It's much like wealth, right? And the issue here, of course, is number one, it's better to have wisdom than to be foolish because you can make better decisions. So once again, wisdom is useful. It's not condemning it, but it's not intrinsic. It's instrumental. It's useful for accomplishing something else. But it's not going to get you past death, because one day you're going to die and the wisdom dies with you. And the bigger problem, of course, is that the more you know, the more worries you have. I envy my dog. You know why I envy my dog? Because my dog sits on the couch and doesn't watch CNN with me. Or if he does watch, he doesn't understand it. And I'm screaming at the television over all the injustice and all the mendacity and all the twisted morality of this world. And the dog sits there very happily as long as you feed him, you know? And so Kohelet says, sometimes it's better to be an oblivious dog than being a wise human being. And sometimes, I got to tell you, I think he might be right. I think he might be right. And then was one more. And this one's a big surprise, because this is the last thing you'd expect to read in the Bible. He says, how about righteousness? How about those who are committed to doing what's right, to pursuing justice in the world, and those who are committed to pursuing religious devotion? And here's what he says. And this I've observed under the sun. Alongside justice, there is wickedness, and alongside righteous, there's wickedness. And I mused, God will doom both the righteous and the wicked, For there's a time for every experience, every happening. And just to go down a little bit, the same fate in store for all, for the righteous and for the good, for righteous and the wicked, for the good and for the pure, and for the impure, for him who sacrifices and him who does not, for him who is pleasing and him who does what is displeasing, and for him who swears, makes oaths, and him who shuns oath. And I said, that's the sad thing under the sun. It's the same fate. There's no divine justice, he says. There's no divine justice. So don't expect that your act of goodness, your act of charity, your act of justice is going to have an echo in the universe. It just doesn't work that way. If you want to do it because it makes you happy, go and do it because it makes you happy. But don't expect it to change anything. And then he says the most remarkable thing. He says, in my own brief span of life, I've seen both things. Sometimes a good man perishes despite his goodness. And sometimes a wicked man endures in spite of his wickedness. After all, how many times have we seen that? So your goodness, your behavior does not determine the span of your life or the quality of your life. And then Kohelet says, don't overdo goodness. And don't act the wise man to excess, or you might be shocked. And don't overdo wickedness. And don't be a fool, or you may die before your time. You must grasp both. What a crazy ethic. The whole Bible is about doing what's right. Kedoshim tihiyu ki kadosh ani Adonai. You will be holy because I, God, am holy, says the book of Leviticus. And comes along Kohelet and says, nah, don't be too good. Be good. Don't be evil, right? Don't be evil. Don't be a hazard. Like, don't be a pig in the world. Don't take more than your share. Don't hurt people on purpose. Come on. But don't be too good. Remember Fagin in Oliver Twist? You got to pick a pocket or two. Because he says the problem with really good people, first of all, is they expect the universe to reward them, and it doesn't. And the second thing is, and we all know this is true, the good, the innocent, the pure, they get smashed. And we've seen this too often. Really saintly people who walk the world doing the best of good things. It's not an easy world. And sometimes those people first of all, because they overestimate the goodness of others and they underestimate their evil. And God knows those people get hurt. So Kohelet finishes his 4 experiments. And he says, it's okay to have fun. It's okay to get pleasure, but don't make a life out of it. It's okay to have wealth. It's good to have wealth, but don't make a life out of that. And wisdom, it's great to have, but don't make a life out of it. And righteousness, do what's right, but don't make a life out of it, because none of these things is going to get you past death. None of these things is going to get you past time. So what's his answer? What's his answer? You know his answer. You've heard it. His answer is the famous song. Pete Seeger wrote this into a song, and then the Byrds, the 1960s rock group, recorded it. To everything, every season, there's a season is set for everything and a time for every experience under heaven. To everything, there's a purpose and a time for every purpose under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time for planting and a time to uproot, a time to slay and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time for building up. Turn, turn, turn. And then he concludes this poetry with prose. What value then can man of affairs get from what he earns? I observe the business that God gave man to be concerned with. He brings to pass everything precisely at its time and puts eternity in their minds, but without ever a man guessing from first to last all the things that God brings to pass. So I realize that the only worthwhile thing for them is to enjoy themselves and do what is good in their lifetime. And that whatever a person eats and drinks and gets enjoyment out of his wealth, it's a gift from God. And do it with a full heart. You see the next paragraph. Go eat your bread in gladness and drink your wine in joy. For your action was long ago proved by God. Let your clothes be washed and your head never lack ointment. Enjoy happiness with the partner you love all your fleeting days of life. For that alone is what you get out of life. out of the means you acquire under the sun. Whatever is in your powers to do, do with all your might, for there's no action, no reason, no learning, no wisdom where you're going in death. So what is Kohelet's answer? Turn, turn, turn. There's a time for every purpose under heaven. We live a life, and there is no existential meaning that takes us past death. In fact, all we have is this life. So enjoy it. Enjoy the life you're given. Life is given to you in a rhythm. There are up times and down times, happy times and sad times, difficult times and easy times, times of celebration and times of mourning. Enjoy and engage in each one of them with a full heart, and don't hold back, because this is not a dress rehearsal. This is life. And the value we get, there is none. The value is simply the enjoyment of the moment. The enjoyment of the moment. And in that, I think he's right. There is a value in the enjoyment of the moment. And that, I think, is one of the reasons why it's read on Sukkot. Because Sukkot, after all, Sukkot is the time given us to enjoy. Zman Simchatenu. And what we're told is enjoy it. God approved this. There's nothing wrong with enjoying it. I don't know if you know Jewish people, but let me tell you something about Jewish people. Jewish people, my Jewish people, I love Jewish people. I live Jewish people. I teach Jewish people. You know, you give them a piece of chocolate cream pie, and immediately they're telling you about the diet they're on. I mean, we all have these reservations, like, I shouldn't eat this. I shouldn't eat this. I eat it anyway, but I shouldn't eat this. Kohelet's saying, don't do that. And he's right. If you're going to eat the cheesecake, eat the cheesecake and enjoy it. And if you're going to diet tomorrow, you'll diet tomorrow. But enjoy the life you're given now. That's one of his two messages. That's one of the messages. I think that's a beautiful message. Don't hold yourself back from the legitimate pleasures of life. But there's another message. It's a very deep message. And I think it's important to pay attention to this as well. If we look back at Kohelet, if we look back at how he put all of this, you'll notice something very interesting. Let me put this sheet back up for a second. You'll notice something interesting. He says, I, Kohelet, was king in Jerusalem over Israel. I set my mind to study, to probe with wisdom all that happens under the sun, an unhappy business, Scott, which God gave men to be concerned with. I observe all that happens, and I found it's all futile and wisdom and wind, the pursuit of wind. And he said, I've grown richer and wiser than anyone who ruled before me in Jerusalem. My mind has zealously absorbed wisdom, and I set my mind to appraise wisdom and appraise folly. And if you look at the next one, he said, I said to myself, it's madness. I venture. I. He's all by himself. He's all by himself. There is no social context to Kohelet. Kohelet is all by himself. And what he's telling you is a man by himself cannot find anything to live for. He, first of all, can't find anything that takes him past death because he's all by himself. There's nothing he's going to invest himself in the world which is going to get him past the experience of death. And more than that, he's going to say, all of the things given to me in joy in life, they all come with a sort of bittersweetness because I know that I won't be around forever. And the bittersweetness sort of poisons the full enjoyment of these things. But now the Bible's telling us something so very important. And this is why I think the book is in the Bible altogether. Because otherwise it's hard to imagine why they'd put a book like this in the Bible, because it sort of contradicts everything else in the Torah, except for this. If I ask most people, where do you gain a sense of the meaningfulness of life? Where do you get a sense of purpose? When do you have a sense that life is really worth living? And your answer would be when I'm with my family, when I'm with friends, when I'm with community, when I share my heart and my soul and my wealth and my work with people around me. And you suddenly realize that Kohelet didn't offer any of that. Kohelet lacks a social context. He doesn't have anybody around him. It's all about me. Remember what the book of Genesis teaches us. I'm going to read it very next week when we open the Torah again in the Genesis. Lo tov heyot adam levado. It isn't right for a human being to walk the world alone. And Kohelet is the very best proof of that. Because if you run his experiments again, but this time in the presence of others, with a social context, they come out very different. Pleasure and fun. It's fun to have a meal. Listen, it's lovely to go to a very nice restaurant, sit down, have a meal, a good bottle of wine. But it's infinitely more fun to do that with somebody else, to share a meal. It's infinitely good to do that. In fact, the food soon becomes irrelevant. It's the conversation, the sharing, the laughter, the tears. That's what makes a meal a meal. And fun? Listen, I like Disneyland. I love going. When I was a kid, I went to Disneyland. I like going as a teenager. I like going as an adult. But the best way to go to Disneyland is with a 5-year-old on your lap. Because to see Disneyland through the eyes of a child is magic. To see any life experience with someone you care for and wish to share it with, that's what makes fun really fun. That's what makes pleasure really pleasure. It's not just the taking of pleasure, it's the giving and sharing of pleasure. The second one is wealth. And he says, I've got all this money, and what am I going to do with it? It doesn't make me happy. Of course it doesn't, because you're only taking it. Wealth only makes you happy when you give. Last night, 2 nights ago, actually, lost a very, very, very dear friend who's a major philanthropist in the community. And his kids got to remember him. And he'd made a lot of money. He was very successful, very, very successful businessman. But one of his sons said something so beautiful. He said, every dollar my dad made him happy, but every dollar he gave away made him elated, super happy. He's so much more enjoyed giving it away than he enjoyed getting it. And this family has given away a lot to so many causes that matter so much to me and to our community. And you have to know that they found such joy in doing it. It's not a matter of getting wealth. It's a matter of sharing it. And let's skip one. Let's go to righteousness. This is one that's infuriating, frankly. Here's what he says. Let's take a look again. Remember? He says, where's righteousness? Here we go. Up. Wealth, wisdom, righteousness. Alongside justice, there is wickedness, and alongside righteousness, there is wickedness. Wait a minute. Alongside justice, there is wickedness, and alongside righteousness, there is wickedness. And he says, I'm complaining because I don't believe that there's anything that can be done about it. But the question is, what did you do? You didn't do anything. You let that observation stop you from giving, from doing. What did you do? In other words, you walked the world and you saw hunger, you saw poverty, you saw disease, you saw ignorance, you saw brokenness. How did it claim you? It didn't claim him. That's the point. He saw it. He observed it. He said, it's not worth doing anything about it because it can't be fixed. Of course he thought that. He didn't try. He didn't try. What's the greatest meaning of life? What we call tikkun olam. Throwing your abilities and your resources at the world's brokenness and bringing some corner of the world to wholeness and finish. That's what makes it beautiful. That's what gives us a sense of profound inner meaning. And that's something he didn't do because he has no social sense. He walks past the homeless in the community. He walks past the hungry. He walks past the sick, and he assumes nothing can be done about it because he never tried. He's lost that basic human instinct of concern, of empathy, of compassion. He's lost that basic human instinct of being claimed by the pain of the other, and therefore he can't find any meaning in his life. That's true. And then finally, wisdom. And this is the most ironic of all of them, if you'll excuse me. because it's remarkable. He said, you know, the problem with wisdom is you gain wisdom and then you die. And wise men and fools all die the same. That's true, by the way. You know, getting wise is not going to make you live longer, and getting to be the wisest of all men is not going to make you live forever, except for one small thing. It's only if you think of wisdom as acquiring wisdom. But wisdom isn't just for acquiring, wisdom is for sharing. And sharing wisdom, teaching wisdom, that's a whole different business. Teaching wisdom changes everything. And here we have this remarkable, wonderful gift. And the gift is, here's Kohelet, who told us in his very first statement that there's nothing new under the sun. Nothing ever changes. Nothing ever improves. Generation comes and generation goes, and they all exhibit the same foolishness. And if that's what you feel, that nothing can ever change, why write a book? Why write a book? You write a book because you think that sharing your wisdom might change something, might let the next generation have a better chance at happiness than yours did, might have a better chance at meaning than yours did. You write a book because you want to straighten out the life of those who come after you and give them the strength and resources to live better than we did. Why write a book if you don't believe anything changes? And this is the great irony. Kohelet, the man who said there's nothing we can do to live past death. Well, we just spent an hour learning his book. He achieved immortality despite himself. So I truly believe that the reason this book is in the Bible and the reason this book is read on Sukkot is a reminder to us of what Genesis taught us. Lo tov heyot adam levado. You can't walk the world alone. Instead, we need each other. We need each other to share the moments of joy in life. We need each other to give and to give of ourselves. We need each other to share our wisdom. We need each other to share righteousness. We need each other. And in doing that together as a community, well, we call that in Judaism Torah. That's the community, the sharing of wisdom, the sharing of community, the sharing of life. And that's what Sukkot is about. And that's what makes Sukkot Zman Simchatenu. Okay, enough listening to me. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to make yourself a sandwich, make yourself a meal, pour yourself a glass of wine, go outside to the Sukkah. If you don't have a Sukkah, don't worry. Just go outside. Take a breath of fresh air. Look up at the stars at night. Look up at the sunshine in the daytime. Feel God's nature. Feel the world of nature around you. Give a bracha of thank you to God for the gift of being alive. We made it through Yom Kippur. We're alive. Give God a word of thank you for that and enjoy. Zman Simchatenu, a time of joy. Thank you for listening. We'll be with Rabbi Hirsch next week, so join us again. Many blessings as this holiday begins. Shana Tova, Gamar Chatima Tova, Hag Sameach, and Shabbat Shalom.